A large portion of film directors have used autobiographical elements to their storytelling. It heightens our understanding of the filmmakers for who they are and what inspires their work. A few famous examples are Martin Scorsese's Catholic upbringing, Alfred Hitchcock's fear of the police from a young age, and Steven Spielberg's use of dysfunctional families following his parents' divorce when he was a teenager, and his Jewish roots. While I may make videos on those individuals at some point, in this video I want to talk about who I think is the ultimate autobiographical filmmaker, which is Charlie Chaplin. To preface this video, Chaplin has a lot of personal ties to me. I would say he's my greatest influence for having an interest in film as an art form and pursuing being a filmmaker. I even made my own shorts inspired by Chaplin when I was a teenager that you can find somewhere on the internet. It was inevitable I would make a video on Chaplin, so it makes sense to start off relatively early in my video film essay pursuit with him. For this video, I will discuss a very abbreviated history of Chaplin's early life leading up to the start of his film career. I will then explore 3 sections of Chaplin's major autobiographical influences throughout his career: the Tramp character as a whole, hand-picked elements from his past sprinkled over the entirety of his films, which includes the potential inspirations of Chaplin's leading female characters, and ending with Chaplin's political leanings. This is not meant to be a linear biography video of Chaplin's life, and the timeline will be a bit skewed as I go through my topics. I would recommend visiting charliechaplin.com, Chaplin's official website run by the Chaplin office for the linear timeline of his life. Charles Spencer Chaplin was born April 16, 1889, in London, England, to music hall performers Charles Chaplin Sr. and Hannah Chaplin. They were separated when Charlie was around 2 or 3. While Charlie saw his father only a handful of times, Charles Chaplin Sr. died when Charlie was 12 of alcoholism. Charlie had an older half-brother, Sidney, whose biological father was never verified. Sidney would go on to have his own career in vaudeville, be Charlie's business manager, and even appear in a few of his younger brother's films. Charlie would have another half-brother, Wheeler Dryden, whose father was Leo Dryden. Growing up in a small flat in London, Charlie's mother Hannah would perform and imitate the hustling and bustling of the streets outside to him while he was sick. Hannah had little means of income, and young Charlie and Sidney were sent to the Lambeth workhouse on 2 separate occasions. Hannah's mental health began to decline and was sent to the Cane Hill Mental Hospital when Charlie was 9. She was in remission, but became ill and was sent back with Charlie, recommitting her himself at 14. Hannah would never fully recover and was in Charlie's care until her death in 1928. Chaplin's first exposure to performing was when he was 5 years old, watching his mother on the vaudeville stage. She began to lose her voice and was losing the crowd. To avoid further embarrassment for his mother, Chaplin took to the stage and performed to a crowd welcoming of this newcomer. His mother never performed again. Chaplin continued to perform in many stage plays and troupes in his teens to early adulthood to raving reviews. When Charlie was 19, his brother Sidney vouched for him to sign on with the Fred Carnot Comedy Company. Starting with small bit parts, Chaplin would receive progressively more starring roles by 20 years old. Chaplin portrayed a wide variety of characters, but was most well known for playing an inebriate. During his second American tour with the Carnot Company in 1913, Chaplin was discovered by the Keystone Film Company, founded by Max Sennett. Sennett expressed interest in Chaplin joining their studio. Upon officially meeting the 24-year-old Chaplin, Sennett initially was apprehensive how young Chaplin was, as he usually bore a mustache or beard on stage and looked considerably older. However, he gave Chaplin a starting chance at $150 a week. Thus, Chaplin's film career began. Chaplin's first film that he was featured in was Making a Living, released in February of 1914. He portrayed a swindler opposite the film's director Henry Lehrman, whose character is a news reporter. It's a pretty typical early film comedy with a flirtatious villain, chase scenes, and the Keystone Cops. For Chaplin's next appearance, he had full reign over the studio's costume department to form one of the most iconic characters in history. The creation of the Tramp is where Chaplin's autobiographical brilliance first shines. To quote Chaplin from his autobiography on the genesis of the Tramp, "I had no idea what makeup to put on. I did not like my getup as the press reporter. However, on the way to the wardrobe, I thought I would dress in baggy pants, big shoes, a cane, and a derby hat. I wanted everything to be a contradiction. The pants baggy, the coat tight, the hat small, and the shoes large. I was undecided whether to look old or young, but remembering Sennett had expected me to be a much older man, I added a small mustache, which I reasoned would add age without hiding my expression. I had no idea of the character. But the moment I was dressed, the clothes and the makeup made me feel the person he was. I began to know him, and by the time I walked onto the stage, he was fully born. David Robinson, Chaplin's official biographer in his book Chaplin, His Life and Art, made the conclusion that while Chaplin stated he had little idea where the Tramp came from until a spark of inspiration, he may have subconsciously created the Tramp through a culmination of his music hall days. Many of Chaplin's own characters on stage, or other performers around the same time, had a similar resemblance to the character of the Tramp. Whatever the real story, the Tramp was released to the public on February 7th, 1914. In the film Kid Auto Races at Venice. Although the Tramp was created for the film Mabel's Strange Predicament, which was shot before Kid Auto Races was released 2 days later. Across Chaplin's stint at Keystone, the Tramp had small glimpses into the evolution of the lovable character we know today. Otherwise, he was the typical wife-stealing boozer that usually ended in a chase scene that Keystone leading men were subjected to. Don't get me wrong, I strongly think that Max Sennett and the Keystone studio were brilliant comedic pioneers, but I understand why Chaplin got a little tired of the Keystone formula. Chaplin appeared in 36 films for Keystone and directed 18 of them, officially starting with Caught in the Rain. Most film scholars agree 1915's The Tramp, made during his short tenure at SNA, marked the true introduction to the Tramp. He has a more kind side, stands up for others, and doesn't get the girl in the end as he puts her happiness before his own. This will be a common end to many of Chaplin's films. Chaplin himself described the Tramp as a gentleman, a poet, a dreamer, always hopeful of romance. In this film alone, this quote already perfectly describes the little fellow and what he will become. Chaplin portrayed the Tramp in 62 films over the span of 22 years. 63 films in 26 years if you include his character in The Great Dictator as the Tramp. I personally wouldn't include The Great Dictator, as Chaplin was adamant the Tramp would never speak. No. He felt it would alienate those who don't speak English and that the Tramp was universal. Once sound was first introduced to film, Chaplin was stubborn to give in to the new revolutionary technology. Chaplin's defiance was displayed in his first film since sound took over the world in 1931's City Lights. A few sound effects are added, and at the beginning of the film, Chaplin mocks the invention of sound by the speech of a statue unveiling be purely made by kazoo. Otherwise, all dialogue is still through title cards. In 1936's Modern Times, there is minimal dialogue with sound effects, and the Tramp quote-unquote speaks through singing a song that is improvised absolute gibberish. Tula, 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 wow. During the Tramp's evolution, it becomes clearly evident that Chaplin saw himself in the Tramp more and more. His quest to be loved by the public and women, which Chaplin struggled with in his career and his life. Although Chaplin was one of the most famous and beloved performers in the world, his insecurities got the better of him and rarely felt loved. His love life was controversial and a constant struggle. He never felt he was truly compatible with any of his relationships until his final wife, Una O'Neill. The Tramp is a poor, homeless vagrant that habitually has his brush with the wealthy or becomes wealthy himself through a string of luck, most notably in the Gold Rush. Chaplin's fascination with the Tramp and wealth mirrors his own Dickensian rags to riches story, from finding scraps in the slums of London as a child to becoming the most wealthy entertainer in the world before 30 years old. And lastly, the Tramp's kindness and helping of others is a reflection of Chaplin's own humanism, wanting the world to be a better place. Chaplin made 14 films with SNA, and the one purely autobiographical instance in this era is the 1915 film A Night in the Show. The film took large inspiration from a play called Mummingbirds, which Chaplin performed during his Fred Carno days. The Mutual period is what Chaplin described as the happiest of his career, and when he had full creative freedom. He made 12 films in about 1.5 years from 1916 to 1917, and we see a couple of autobiographical examples. In 1 AM, he portrays a wealthy gentleman returning home completely inebriated, and his sole purpose for the entire film is attempting to get to bed. It features Chaplin accomplishing a few pratfalls, reminiscent of his days in the music hall, also portraying an inebriate. In Easy Street, it is the first notable occurrence of his building the sets to resemble the streets of London where he grew up. This became another one of the most common autobiographical aspects throughout Chaplin's career. In 1918, following the signing to First National, Chaplin was set on his own independence and built his own movie studio. The Chaplin studio's front facade was built as English cottages, which reminded Chaplin of home. In 1921, Chaplin produced his first feature film, The Kid. The general plot involves a destitute and unmarried mother abandoning her child in a wealthy individual's car. The car is stolen by thieves. They notice the child in the car and drop him off in the streets, where the tramp stumbles upon him and adopts him. A few years later, the authorities discover that the child lives in poverty and the tramp isn't the biological father. The authorities take the child against his will and plan to send him to an orphanage. The tramp, through an exciting climax, rescues the child. The mother, now wealthy, crosses paths with her son and asks the public for their help relocating her son to her. The child is taken back to his mother while the two find refuge in a flophouse. The end of the film reunites the two as the mother welcomes the tramp into her home to visit with her son. For the kid's inspiration, Chaplin would go back to his childhood, being sent to the workhouse and taken from his family. In 1919, with his first wife, Mildred Harris, she gave birth to a son who was malformed and died only 3 days later. This devastated Chaplin. Chaplin utilizes both of these traumatic moments from his past to save both his childhood self and the son whom he can never hold again. Chaplin's first love, Hetty Kelly, would be the strongest influence for a majority of Chaplin's heroines throughout his films. They met in 1908 while both were performers on the London stage. Kelly was part of the song and dance troupe Bert Kootz's Yankee Doodle Girls. While they were romantically linked for a very brief time, Kelly felt they were too young, and Chaplin made the assumption her mother wanted her daughter's suitor to be a wealthy and well-established gentleman, not a poor comedian. Once Chaplin embarked on his tour to America, he would never see Kelly again. Hetty Kelly succumbed to the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918. This wasn't revealed to Chaplin until his first return to London in 1921. Nevertheless, Chaplin never forgot about Kelly, as there are frequent hints of her in most of his films. Commonly, Chaplin's leading lady is portraying a performer, more specifically, a dancer and singer. The tramp, as I stated before, occasionally doesn't get the girl in the end. Instead, she ends up with a quote-unquote better suitor than the tramp, sometimes with the tramp even suggesting the better pairing, putting her happiness above his own. Chaplin felt he was never good enough for Kelly unless he was wealthy, though this wouldn't stop Chaplin from fantasizing a world where he did win Kelly's affections. I think Chaplin knew modern times would be his last for his beloved character, as sound continued to advance in film, and he decided to give him the ending he felt he deserves, both for himself and the tramp. The Gamine is a well-established dancer and singer by the end of the film, and the tramp wins over her affections as they triumphantly walk towards the sunrise without a care in the world. The ending he wished for himself and Hetty, just by being himself all along. Some film historians argue that Hetty Kelly may not have been the only inspiration for Chaplin's leading female characters. Another possible influence is Chaplin's mother, Hannah, who was also a dancer and singer. I partially agree. While I'm sure Chaplin took inspiration from his mother, I think there's two films where it could be especially evident. In City Lights, the tramp stumbles across a blind flower girl who mistakes him as a millionaire. With his growing affections for her, he promises he will pay for an expensive operation to regain her eyesight. Through many hijinks of encountering a millionaire who is incredibly generous when drunk, but snooty and forgetful when sober, many odd jobs, and even trying his hand at a boxing match, the tramp desperately finds ways to make money for the flower girl's operation. The drunken millionaire gives the tramp the needed funds, though he is accused of stealing the money. Before he is sent to prison, the tramp rushes to the flower girl and gives her the money for the operation. Upon release from prison, the tramp re-encounters the flower girl. Now owning a successful flower shop and gaining her full sight, she recognizes him by touch as being her benefactor. Now this could be an instance where Chaplin felt he was saving his mother. This was Chaplin's first film he began after Hannah died in 1928 during the production of The Circus. Chaplin wished he could have helped his mother's illness, throwing as much money to the problem while continuing to care for her. Wealth didn't matter, but in the case of City Lights, it did. Some may be quick to note the female lead's name in The Great Dictator is named Hannah after his mother. Besides her namesake, I don't see many similarities between Paulette Goddard's character and Chaplin's mother, other than perhaps their feisty and lively personalities. The other example would be 1952's Limelight. The leading female character, Terry, a dancer, is a combination of both Chaplin's mother and Hetty Kelly. At the beginning of the film, Terry attempts to end her life when Calvero saves her. He nurses her back to health by also aiding her self-esteem and regaining her passion for dancing. Chaplin is nursing his own mother back to health and helping her to get back onto the stage after her early retirement. Terry, despite their age difference, wants to marry Calvero. Calvero instead guides her towards the young composer Neville, whom he believes would be a better suitor. Calvero, like the tramp and Chaplin himself, selflessly puts her happiness before his own. saying farewell to Hetty one last time. Chaplin told his oldest sons that Limelight would be his last film. Limelight would make Chaplin's life and career thus far come full circle and be his most autobiographical. The film takes place in his homeland of London, England in 1914, the year of Chaplin's first film appearance, making a living, and the creation of the Tramp. The leading female character, Terry, a dancer, as I mentioned before, is a combination of his mother and Hetty Kelly. Chaplin portrays Calvero, a washed-up vaudeville tramp comedian turned alcoholic. Chaplin held the firm belief Calvero was based on Frank Tinney, another stage actor, though one can't help but think that the true inspiration was Chaplin's father, Charles Chaplin Sr. Chaplin portraying a comedian's diminished popularity is reminiscent of Chaplin's own fading popularity at this point in his career, due to not only retiring his tramp character with the changing times of the advent of sound, but also his outspoken political beliefs, which I will get to shortly. The film would be a Chaplin family affair. Chaplin's 2 sons from his second marriage, his 3 oldest children from his current marriage, and his half-brother Wheeler Dryden all made appearances ranging from cameo-type roles to major parts. His current wife Una O'Neill also stood in as a double for lead Claire Bloom. Chaplin would even collaborate with silent film rival Buster Keaton. Although rumored to have a long-standing feud, the two got along very well, with Chaplin giving Keaton full creative freedom during their scene together. With all of these factors in place, it seems obvious this would be an artist's finale with the culmination of their entire life. While Chaplin was heading to London for the premiere of Limelight, he would find yet again another autobiographical circumstance that would inspire his next film. Due to Chaplin's long-standing political beliefs and accusations of communism, he was exiled from the United States. Chaplin's first display of his political leanings are shown in 1917's The Immigrant. Chaplin parodies the American immigration services by exhibiting the shabbiness the immigrants are treated to, and in one scene, the tramp kicks an immigration officer in the rear end. In an interview, Chaplin, on his own political views, stated, "As for politics, I'm an anarchist. I hate government and rules and fetters. People must be free." Chaplin's political views undoubtedly originated from his childhood of extreme poverty, despising government and capitalism that looks down upon the lower class and those with mental illnesses, wishing no one would be ill-treated as he and his family was growing up. Of course, Chaplin became a very wealthy man through adulthood, though he always felt his wealth was earned considering his difficult adolescence in the slums of London. Chaplin's children have mentioned growing up with him as a father, he gave strict lessons that wealth must be earned and everything could disappear at any instant. We wouldn't see much more of Chaplin's political ideals until 1936's Modern Times. During his year and a half of world travels in the early 1930s, Chaplin met with many of the world's most prestigious intellectuals, and he noticed more of his fascination and disdain with the current state of the world. As the 1930s trudged through, so did the Great Depression. Chaplin was distraught over the harsh labor forces in America. He feared capitalism and industrial revolution would continue to take away jobs from the average working American. Enter Modern Times, a spoof and talking point on evolving machinery that supposedly aids the workforce, awful working conditions, protests, and living on the streets due to difficulty finding any means of income. The tramp also has a moment of determination to return to prison rather than the aimless task of finding work where there is none, which was common during the Great Depression. Chaplin's next political venture would be his riskiest. During the 1930s, Adolf Hitler's rise to power and the public's notice of his parallels to Chaplin began. They were both born the same year and the same month, only 4 days apart. Both experienced poverty and rose to worldwide notability. And of course, both fashioned the same mustache. With the majority of the world's growing fear of the Nazi Party, Chaplin said Hitler must be laughed at, and he was determined to produce a spoof on the dictator, despite this being highly controversial. The Great Dictator was released in 1940 during the midst of World War II. In it, Chaplin portrays double roles. He plays a Jewish barber, as the Nazis wrongly believed Chaplin to be Jewish, with the resemblance to the Tramp, though he speaks in this film. The second character is Adenoid Hinkle, a blatant parody on Hitler. Throughout the film, it satirizes fascism and the opposition of not only Hitler, but also Mussolini and others.
Garbage. Garbage!
Chaplin also demonstrated the vague public perception at the time of the disregard for the Jewish people in Europe. Chaplin later wrote in his autobiography that had he had known the true atrocities of the Holocaust, he would not have made the film. At the end of the film, the barber and Hinkle are mistaken for each other. The barber impersonating Hinkle is given the stage to speak to the world. The famous and timeless speech is said not by the character of the Jewish barber, Hinkle, or the tramp, but Chaplin speaking from the heart to the world.
Soldiers, in the name of democracy, let us all unite!
The Great Dictator was Chaplin's greatest financial success, though the ending speech sparked controversy at the time of its release. A speech pleading to end war, capitalism, fascism, and bring world peace was deemed too preachy by some for the average movie-going audience. Chaplin's next film, 1947's Monsieur Verdoux, would be another comedy with traces of political ideology. Verdoux, performed by Chaplin, is a bank teller who is laid off. He marries and then murders wealthy widows to financially support his real-life family. Once Verdoux is caught by the authorities, he defends himself by saying the world creates mass murderers, even encourages them, and compares himself insignificant to those who create weapons of mass destruction. The film is a critique on capitalism and the world coaxing those who create weapons to destroy the masses. Over the course of Chaplin's career, J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI, long suspected of Chaplin's political ideals, attempted to turn the public against Chaplin in the 1940s. After The Great Dictator and Monsieur Verdoux, Chaplin was accused of being a communist. Chaplin continually denied being a communist. Despite this, there were calls for his deportation. I think Chaplin foresaw his exile, and this led him to believe Limelight would be his last film, with a culmination of his entire life. Chaplin's last film with autobiographical or political ties was 1957's A King in New York, shot entirely in Europe, where Chaplin now resided. It's about a king exiled to the United States due to revolution. King Shadov, portrayed by Chaplin, encounters a boy Rupert, played by Chaplin's son Michael, whose parents are imprisoned due to not giving names during a McCarthy hearing. The film was described by reviewers at the time to be Chaplin's most bitter. It condemns the methods of the House Committee of Un-American Activities, which of course was responsible for Chaplin's exile, and calling the anti-communist scare a bunch of nonsense. Chaplin would also satirize more of his thoughts of America with commercialism, the current music, and recent innovations in the film industry, namely the widescreen. Chaplin's A Countess from Hong Kong in 1967 would be his final film. Besides being based on a film he originally wrote in the 1930s for his wife at the time, Paulette Goddard, it has no autobiographical moments. It was a commercial and critical failure, which devastated Chaplin. Chaplin received renewed appreciation in the 1970s and was awarded an honorary Academy Award in 1972. Upon Chaplin's arrival on stage, he received a 12-minute standing ovation, longer than any in the history of the awards. Chaplin would continue to write new films and continue working, but as his health began to decline, no new films would be produced. Chaplin passed away Christmas Day, 1977. With Chaplin's autobiography published in 1964, it finally gave the world valuable insight into how the man and filmmaker came to be. While some of his films have blatantly obvious autobiographical correlations, myself and other film historians can only assume what was truly going on in Chaplin's psyche as he created his films. Chaplin's autobiography, while thorough, doesn't entirely have much to mention on his working methods on his sets. For further reading, I would highly recommend Chaplin biographer David Robinson's book, Chaplin, His Life and Art, and checking out the documentary series Unknown Chaplin. Knowing this encapsulates who Chaplin was as a man and a perfectionist autobiographical filmmaker that continues to inspire generations of aspiring filmmakers and historians to come. Thank you for watching my third film essay. If you haven't already watched my most recent film essay, which I tackle why I love physical media over streaming and digital, you can watch it right here. And you can also watch the series I'm very slowly going through, which is one film a year since the beginning, which is me going through every single year of film history and picking my favorite movies of every year. And also, feel free to follow me on Letterboxd. My account name is Far Too Fast. I'm constantly watching movies and reviewing movies, so feel free to follow me there. And if you haven't already, please leave a like, a comment, and subscribe to this channel. I will be continuing to make more film essays in the future. See you on the next one.